Today I'm going to explain why the Blender grease pencil remains a viable tool for 2D animation. And this isn't really an endorsement of Blender 2.8, positive or negative, because everything that I'm going to elucidate here can be done with Blender 2.79. But the reason I bring this up is because I was thinking about my workflow in OpenToonz, and so I have this sequence that I'm working on. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. This guy says something, and she says something. At some point, her attitude changes a little bit, and then she kind of starts to make this move, which he doesn't know what is about to happen. So he has this reaction, and then surprise surprise, what she does is goes like that and does her hair. Okay, and then what he does is more or less give her a nod, like, you know, impressive. Okay, well, what was interesting about this, and I'm explaining this just to lay the groundwork for why, if you're a Blender fan, that it can still be a really good tool for especially the first part of the animation process. Basically up to the point of the pencil test, and then possibly ink as well. Now it definitely falls apart when it comes to color, flood filling and all the rest. But so here's the reason I bring this up, is that I realized as I was putting the scene together that it is really axiomatic that you're never going to get the timing right, especially if you don't have your dialogue tracks yet. So in other words, I'm taking this keyframe here and I'm stretching it out to here, right? But in practice, when the show gets chopped together, there's no way that this pose is just going to happen to need 1 second, okay? Same with her next pose. So all these poses in practice, what they're really there for is for me to work the scene out. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and make a little correction here to show you what actually probably makes more sense, and then it'll become clear why this is pertinent to working in the Blender grease pencil. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm taking each of my keyframes and I'm doing what I'm going to say should probably become my general practice. This is really how I should be doing it most of the time. If we know for a fact that there is no way we're going to have our timing figured out when we're at the point of creating our keys. There's no way. It's gonna get changed, and things are gonna get rippled downstream or moved upstream, or maybe even rearranged completely. So in practice, the best way to map out a scene is to just sit here and act it. Okay, so the question now becomes, well, how long did that actually take? It wouldn't be a bad idea to have a stopwatch going. But I will say that this is a really good way to work, and you're literally just using the up and down arrows on your keyboard to figure out the timing, and you basically rough it in. But from a production flow standpoint, I don't really want to go ahead and map in this timing. It's not that important because it's going to get changed anyway. What would be way more important would be to go into these frames and go ahead and ink them and color them and do whatever I'm going to do, you know, bearing in mind that there may be more in-betweens added later or something like that. So what does that have to do with Blender? Well, learning in OpenToonz that this workflow makes sense to accelerate the process of getting up to the point where we can go ahead and do ink and paint and basically finishing work made me stop and say, well, wait a second. When what I have done in the Blender grease pencil that was effective workflow-wise was pretty much this right here. What I would do is I would draw a character, and then I would just put in the next keyframe, and I would just map in all my keys. I would not I wouldn't. I mean, I did do it, but I found it was counterproductive to go ahead and space out my keys and figure out the timing and try to pin down the timing right here in Blender's timeline. It never works. In fact, the show that we have right now of what have we got, about in a minute and 15 seconds of show, there is nothing in the show that once I brought it into my video editor, which happens to be Vegas, there's nothing that didn't wind up getting retimed in the editor. So for me, I'm going, ding, ding, ding. What does that tell you? That tells you that up to the point of ink and paint, you're actually kind of better off to just have sequential keyframes. Just plan it out and then just use your timing this way, just toggling between your keys to ballpark it. Ballpark your timing so you know you've got what you need to tell your story, but you don't care about actually getting the exact timing pinned down. So having said that, what does that have to do with Blender? Well, there's 4 reasons that I would give right here why the Blender Grease Pencil is a really powerful tool. Number 1, animation based on what I call, and I coined this term, I don't know if anybody else would say this, but I call it build out. And what I mean by build out is exactly what I just described. You just get your keys done, and by the way, just for completeness, I'm going to, I know you're saying, Dave, you're nuts. I'm going to go ahead and delete those strokes. So they're only here. Okay. But what I mean by build out is you just put in your keys and then you build out your timing from there. So your goal is to have as few drawings as possible. And you know, just by going through it in real time like this, you know you're going to be able to tell your story. Okay? So if you work that way, that circumvents one of the big problems with trying to do ink and paint in Blender. Because in Blender, if you pull an image sequence, well, let's say you worked out all your timing and you render it out. Well, now you've got 15,000 images that are duplicates of each other, because if well, not 15,000, but if you took this pose that you see right here and you held it for 1 second, well, if you render that out, you're going to have 24 pictures of that face that are all the exact same picture. Well, why do I want to do flood filling and inking on 24 pictures when I can do it on 1? So you want to postpone the timing until the art's pretty much complete and finished, right? So when I say build out, what I mean is I want to say, okay, well now maybe I realize that I want to have an in-between pose here that helps tell the story a little better. Okay, so I'm going to build out. All I'm going to do is move this keyframe over, okay? And now I'm going to point to reason number 3. I'm going to skip number 2. Well, I'll just say number 2 is infinite canvas. Well, and that's true with OpenToonz vector layers as well. But it's really cool that Blender has an infinite canvas so that if you're going to do a camera move or something like that, you can do it all right here without having to resize the canvas or anything like that, because it is effectively an infinite canvas. Number 3 reason is what I call plastic or magnet. You know, what you can do in OpenToonz with the plastic tool, you pretty much can do better in Blender, is the truth of the matter. Because at any point in time, you can just Control Select, all right? And if I go ahead and click here, and I'm hitting the, let me see, I want to hit the, no, I want to hit the period key, so it rotates around the cursor. And I'm going to put this guy's, I'm actually going to go like this, and I say, well, what if I want to do some squash and stretch here? Okay, okay, so I'm going to make sure the magnet tool is on, and I'm going to go ahead and stretch this guy out a little bit, just a little bit. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is go in and let's say we're going to change his eyes, okay, somewhat. So I'm just going to use the eraser. So what I'm doing is, and this is what Richard Williams calls the passing pose. So when you have 2 extremes, your character's going from this to this, what you do on the passing pose, the key in between your extremes or your key poses, is in fact probably more important than anything in determining what the action of your character is going to feel like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put sort of a squint in here. Okay, and then just for kicks and giggles, I'll go ahead and get rid of the onion skins. Okay, so now I have these three poses. Let me hit the A key. Hello. Okay. Okay, so now my animation went from, you know, from here to here. Okay? Okay, that's what I mean by building out. I'm just adding new keyframes in between wherever necessary in order to expand the detail and tell the story a little bit better. And you sort of, you know, you discover this pretty automatically. Well, what does that do for you from a Blender standpoint? Well, it gives you the ability to render this out and only render the frames you drew. So right now I could render this guy out if of course, maybe I would ink it, maybe not. If I don't ink it, I have what looks like a pencil test. You know, there it is. And I could bring it into OpenToonz to ink. That would be fine. Or I could ink it here. I could go to this ink layer, add some black ink, and I'm going to go ahead and lock the sketch, by the way. Okay, so then I might go like this. Okay, and I'm also going to take this layer and make it a little more transparent, so it's just sort of a guide. Okay, so this is the fourth reason why the Blender Grease Pencil remains a good tool, is what I call line control. Line control, which is that I can use the editing power of the Grease Pencil to tighten up my lines and, you know, do these obvious things that I'm doing. Now, one of the other reasons why okay, there's a danger. One of the dangers is with Blender, you will be prone to introducing gaps in your lines and in your art if you do your inking in Blender. For that reason, for me personally, I would probably tend to render out the pencil test, bring it into OpenToonz, ink it and color it in OpenToonz, and then map out the timing. Okay. Now, there is one flaw to that approach, by the way. The flaw to that approach is that if you come back here and you want to work out your timing, and you do it the way I've generally done it, which is to put each character's shot into a sub-X sheet, well, now you've got a whole bunch of levels. And so if you have to change timing, you might have to go in and move a lot of levels around. So this approach is kind of predicated on the idea that if you work out your story this way, probably you could go ahead and if you're using Toonz raster levels in particular, I could go in here and actually do all my inking and coloring in this same level. So, you know, as far as the total shot, you might have, you know, background images and layers and all this stuff. But in terms of your acting and just your characters, you should be able to keep it mostly on one level if you know what you're doing. And the way you would do that here is I would add another brush, and I would take this one and make it somewhat transparent. So now I'm not having to make the level transparent like by using the opacity. I'm just making the color that I did my pencil test with transparent. And then I can go in here and choose whatever brush I'm going to use and go ahead and ink away. And now I have the advantage, okay, that was about the worst line I've ever drawn in my life, but now I have the advantage of being able to do my inking with all of the benefits of the My Paint brushes and everything else that comes with OpenToonz. If you do your inking in Blender, you're pretty much, I mean, yeah, there's some you know, variance in the brushes that is useful, but for the most part you're kind of relegated to a more simplistic look. And again, because you've got the potential issue of this right here. You know, here's a line that overstepped the boundary, or else of course you might have the problem of a line that comes up a little short, so that means when you go to color it, you know, your flood fill winds up filling your whole page because there was a gap. So my personal recommendation would be generally to do the inking in OpenToonz. But if you like Blender's if you like the plastic ability, if you like the ability to draw a character and then scale it as much as you want and everything still works, then the Blender Grease Pencil, as I said, does remain a viable tool, in my opinion, in the earlier part of the 2D animation process. The other thing that's advantageous about it is that if I had a camera move on this character, let me go ahead and unlock this. Okay, in fact, frankly, to make it simple, I'm just going to get rid of the ink layer. Okay, now let's just say we had a situation where, let me go ahead and tab. Hello. Sorry, I've been in OpenToonz for so long that I've forgotten some of my hotkeys. So in Blender, let's say I've realized that I've got this guy framed wrong. Now it's cool from a drawing standpoint. I didn't care because it's an infinite canvas, right? In fact, I might have even been in this view when I did the drawing in the first place, not the camera view. But now we realize that there's a little bit of a problem. So let's just say we're going to move the camera, and we get our character's scale and positioning more where we think it should be. Okay, well, if there's a camera move, that's going to be problematic, in that we're again creating a situation where over the course of the camera move, you've got the same character that you've got a bunch of different pictures of them, and now they all have to be colored. Well, the good thing is, with Blender, what you could do is go ahead and limit it to, don't do the camera move, but pull the camera out so that you get the scale where you need it to be, and then crank the daylights out of your render resolution. Like instead of rendering here, I've got it at 1280 by 720, go ahead and render this at like 4,000 pixels wide. We know that OpenToonz deals with really large images very well, and so by doing that, we build enough resolution into our art that we know we can do our zoom in and our camera move, and it's not gonna look pixelated or scaled, you know, after the fact. So again, you know, for reasons, build out is I think is going to become huge for me as an animation technique. In other words, I'm drawing as few frames as possible and leaving the exact time to the last minute. That's just a pragmatic decision because I found it never ever fails. You always wind up changing it later. So why pretend you're not going to have to, right? Okay. So anyway, there's that. Go ahead and kill this, and that brings me back to here. What I was saying about inking, I guess I'll sort of finish that thought to say that probably what I would do here is I would use the standard Toonz raster brush, which is what I usually use for inking on this particular project. Okay, and so then I can go ahead and ink this guy, and when I'm done, I can actually just I should say this from a filling standpoint. Let me show you this. This is actually kind of important. I'm going to go ahead and just close this shape. Whoops. I'm going to just close this shape like that. Okay. So here's one of the problems you'll run into. Let me change this color to something that's easy to see. Okay, now if I fill this, you can see that the pencil lines underneath have created a filling problem for me. Okay. If I go in here and I make these all the way transparent, doesn't matter. Okay, does not matter. It's still gonna, those lines as far as OpenToonz is concerned are still there. So how do you get around that? What you do is, if you're really, really sure that you're done with your pencil drawing, delete the palette entry. Okay, now in this case it's telling me I can't, because if you're going to use this strategy, you don't want to do it with the first two palette entries. So in other words, in the real world, what I would have wanted to do is do all my pencil drawing with color, or with palette entry number 3 or larger. And if you do that, then it's easy, and I'll demonstrate it here with the color. Now I can delete the color, and if I choose to delete styles, lines, and areas, then that color is completely destroyed forever. Okay, so those lines are no longer there, whereas by just turning the alpha down, those lines are still there, and they will interfere with your filling process. So in this case, again, I'm going to go ahead and delete this because I don't want it in there. And you can sort of use the selective addition and deletion of palette entries to sort of control your workflow. And by doing it that way, you would be able to keep all of this ink and paint on the same level as the pencil drawings. Okay, so that's it. That was 20 minutes, and hopefully those of you who think I'm a blender grease pencil hater will realize I'm not. I like the blender grease pencil. Let me say this: if I had a character where I definitely was going to be doing a lot of squash and stretch animation, or if I had a highly articulated character where I want to be able to grab just the shoulder down through the hand and move it and do keys that way with basically modeling and sculpting as opposed to drawing, then Blender Grease Pencil is really fast and intuitive for that sort of thing. So anyway, that's it for now, and I'm sure there will be, as usual, more later.